is Michael. Glad you could join me. And today I want to start a series that I'm calling Life and Labels. And it's a series that's going to talk about autism diagnoses. My diagnosis, diagnoses probably in general. Are they important? Should you get one? What I see the problems, why I believe that high-functioning autism is even underdiagnosed. And I don't know how long this series will go. It's probably not going to just run consecutively, 1, 2, 3. It's just something that we're doing. As I referenced in last video, there's a whole range of different ways that we could go with this. And I struggled with that in the introduction, and I kind of have the same issue, like, okay, where do I go now? And so I'm gonna just try to go just what's on my heart, what I'm feeling like sharing, what's going on with me currently. I may not share, I sometimes may share specifics of what's going on with me, but regardless, if I'm sharing about something, it's probably related to something that I'm currently thinking about, talking about, researching, whatever it is. And so I hope that by doing that and not trying to follow some schedule or have some real organized, laid out plan, which was probably what I would at least think I should do, but I hope by not worrying about that it maintains that authenticity, that realism that I wanted to get, because I just want to share with you what's going on with me. I want to hear at some point what's going on with you, and I want this to be, as I've said, a community where together we figure out how to make life work even better, whether we're autistic, whether a friend or family member or loved one is autistic, whether we don't even know an autistic person, whether we have a totally different issue. I want this to be a place where we can all get together and encourage and help each other. And so today, on this first episode, or whatever you want to call it, of this series, again, I'm calling Life and Labels, talking about autism diagnoses. I want to talk a bit about my diagnosis, but not like the specifics of what it happened, what it's about, which I think could be a good topic of conversation at some point for those of you who have either been diagnosed and are wondering what other people think, maybe you're considering it. I want to talk about my road to diagnosis, why I got there, how I got there. And so I'm 46 years old, if you don't know that. I think I shared that last time. So I'm 46. I was born in 1974. And so my road and journey to autism diagnosis is far different than a lot of younger people. As I understand, there was no sort of high-functioning autism, Asperger's diagnosis until sometime in, I think it was 1984 was the first time that happened. And so my only ideas, my only connections with autism, the only thing I knew about it was probably the movie Rain Man. Came out in 1988, I think. Dustin Hoffman, Tom Cruise. And it's a story that tells that Rain Man, who is, well, I'm not going to get into the details of that, but the story is about, based on the life of a real life guy, Kim Peek, who's a guy who actually now people think might not have had autism, but he had savant syndrome. And so anyway, this was my only experience. I don't know if you've seen the movie, but I don't live that way. Toothpicks don't fall on the ground. I don't see 247. I don't have to watch the People's Court at a certain time or fly in a certain airline because I have never had an incident, or some of the stuff that happened in the movie. And so, but that's all I knew about autism, was just kind of weird people, right, that could do weird stuff. That was about the only thing I'd ever heard. And I remember one time when I was older hearing my boss talk about having Asperger's, and he was joking around with it about it, but I didn't even really know what that was. And so this was just kind of this thing. Autism was out there. My only other touch point to autism was that we have some friends, some family friends, who had a son who was autistic, and autistic, not high-functioning autism. As I understand it, at least, he had some speech difficulties, some developmental disabilities, and things like that. And so these are my only experiences until it was probably about 2013, something like that. I was close to 40 years old, and we lived in Ecuador at the time, and I was reading a book, and they were describing, it was just a novel, kind of an apocalyptic United States, kind of weird, interesting novel. Anyway, they had this Bill Gates type character in the book, and he was talking, they were just describing him. And I have to tell you, nothing about what he said or what he did or what they wrote about him was like, "Ooh, I do that," and I do. There was nothing like that. He was just talking about how he looked at life. I don't know. There was just something about this guy that like made sense. And it was the first character that I can really remember like connecting with and relating to. And he had Asperger's. And I'm like, that's interesting. And I say he's a Bill Gates-like character. A lot of people have supposed that Bill Gates may be autistic. But it was just this super rich kind of guy who had an interesting life. And so that was just kind of out there. I didn't know what to do with it. And a couple years later, I was just thinking about it. It was something that would come to my head now and then. And a couple years later, I was thinking about it, decided to take one of those online tests about autism. Do you have Asperger syndrome? And I took the test, and I remember it came out about like 95 or 90. I don't know. It was like the super likely that I had Asperger's, as they called it. Maybe in those days, the transition was taking place in those times. And so I brought my wife in. We talked about it. I showed her the questions. We talked about all these kinds of things. And it was kind of something out there that might explain me, our marriage, a lot of different stuff, a lot of challenges, a lot of different things that we had experienced, that I had experienced. But that just kind of sat there again for a while, and I didn't really think about it. And then we started watching, we would bring it up every now and then, and I kept thinking about it off and on. But we started watching a show. We were looking for shows to watch, and some friends had recommended the show Parenthood. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but we watched, in the very first episode, there's a character, Max, who's probably 9 or 10. I don't remember exactly how old he was, and he gets diagnosed with Asperger's. And something about that whole thing, it was so painful, it was so hard, it was like, you know what? I don't want to watch this anymore. And my wife is like, well, can I keep watching it? And I was like, okay, go ahead. And I would be around sometimes when she was watching, and I don't know if she felt uncomfortable or not, but I saw bits and pieces of the show here and there. But it just sort of forced me to get into it. And we had talked about it, and it was kind of like, well, I feel like maybe I have this Asperger's, and so what are we going to do? And so she really wanted to watch. She wanted to study. She wanted to know more. And so I didn't want anything to do with that. And so she watched and got through the whole show. And it just kept kind of coming up to me. Even though I wasn't watching it, it was just kind of something that just kept sort of bombarding my thoughts. It was always there because my wife was watching it. She would talk about it. Another character, we would talk about it a little bit. Another character was discovered to have Asperger's, and just this whole thing. And it finally came to the point where I was like, you know what? Let's watch it. Let's watch it together. And so we watched the show Parenthood together, and that was hard. It was really painful. I would look at the characters and the weird or frustrating or emotional stuff that would take place, especially with Max, who was a little bit more evident in what he did. And it was kind of like, I remember at times being like, well, yeah, I don't do that. And my wife would kind of be like, well, yeah, kind of you do sometimes in this way and that way. It was really hard. It was really hard for me. We watched the whole show. It was painful. It was funny. It was sad. It was all this stuff. But finally got to that because my wife had talked about wanting to get, I don't remember all it went, but before this, after this, I don't know, around this whole time, my wife had talked about, she wanted to get me diagnosed. And we lived in Ecuador, and there was actually in the city of Cuenca where we lived, there was this really awesome autism clinic. It's better than anything I found here in California, actually, in this last couple of years, year and a half that we've been here. But finally, I went in, and I started doing this. I guess maybe the thing that finally got me to this point was I just decided after watching it, after talking about it, like, that's me. I have Asperger's. I didn't know anything about Autism Spectrum Disorder. The show called it Asperger's. It's the only thing I'd ever heard of. So that was me. And so I was a struggle with this because when you're going to get diagnosed, from my perspective, there's two ideas. One, They tell you you have autism, you're autistic, and you're broken. That's kind of the way I looked at it. And two, they tell you, no, you don't have autism. And basically the end result for me was just saying, well, I guess I'm just an a-hole. I guess I'm just a jerk. I guess I'm just, because of my emotional responses, all the different stuff that would happen. And so I felt like it was one of these two things. And so it was such a challenge emotionally. And I remember looking up, I think this was actually before I got diagnosed. We had decided we were going to, but it hadn't happened yet. And I looked up how to live with Asperger's. I was just an emotional struggle for me. Like, what do I do? How do I live like this? And I tell you, the only thing I could find was like, look at people in the eye, more than 1/3 and not more than 2/3. And run in exercise clothes. And it was like all these like practical stuff, some of the stuff that maybe would have been helpful in some information way. Other stuff was just kind of like, well, I don't need to hear that. But I was looking for like, how do I live with myself being a person with Asperger's? Or I would say now, because I look at it different, like how do I live with myself being autistic? How do I do that? How do I deal with the struggles of feeling broken, all the emotions, all the things? And really that's why I looked up, I remember searching Living with Asperger's, and I couldn't find anything. And you might guess that that's a lot of the reason why I have now this channel called Living with Autism, because that's the point, right? I'm not interested in telling you, hey, look at people in the eye this much or don't, or do this or don't do that. Maybe some of that stuff is helpful at sometimes, but I think in the next video we're actually going to talk about these things and why I feel like we're in many ways approaching autism in the wrong way. But what I want this video, what I want this channel to be about, what I want all of this to be about is to say, hey, how do we deal with this? How do we get through this? While my neighbors are thumping around upstairs, I hope they're not too loud. Because it's hard. Because I look at myself and now I have a label, right? Life and labels. Now I have a label and it says you're different. There's something wrong with you. They tell me I have level 1 Autism Spectrum Disorder. And so what do I do? And so I want, and as I shared a little bit about myself when we talk about this channel, that's the point. I'm going to talk more about the specifics of how my diagnosis went. I think in the future, how that went, what I remember her saying and how I felt when she told me that I had autism and the way she told me, but just that whole experience. But I want to provide a place for everybody, including for myself, because I still struggle on a daily basis, I think. How do you live with autism? How do you live successfully? How do you ignore the way everybody says you're broken? How do you ignore the struggles? How do you move past the failures? How do you, when something happens and I get frustrated and I have some form of meltdown, or how do you do that? And so I don't have all the answers, but I hope that together we can help find the answers, the specific answers for you, for me, for a lot of people out there, because we're all different and there is no universal answer. But anyway, I just wanted to share with you that brief story, hopefully semi-brief story of how I got to the place where I wanted to get diagnosed, and a little bit maybe of why I did. So anyway, that's the story. Thanks for joining me. I look forward to seeing you again next time. Have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye.